to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, your host today. Joining us in the next segment will be Paul Craig Roberts, and we're going to be talking about recent developments in the economy as well as the buildup in tensions that may lead to a third world war, at least to a much, much revived Cold War, as we've already seen. And of course, that involves the manipulation of the price of oil. It also involves the Congress, Boehner, and the Democrats signing us up to insure the derivatives of the large banks. That's a big part of this. Now, another aspect of betrayal, I believe, of this budget can be seen in pensions. Now, of course, there's a lot of different ways that people can get their pensions. We have Social Security, a lot of people think of as their pension. Well, guess what they did? They just allow, with this open border amnesty program, incentivizing illegal immigration, they allow those illegal immigrants to be allowed to get Social Security benefits. That's one of the things that we're going to see happen there. Social Security was already insolvent before we opened our borders to the world and told everybody they can come to America and retire at our expense or come with disability and get the entitlement programs here as if they had been a citizen of this country. Of course, you can't sustain that. That's the exact purpose of this open amnesty. But of course, there's another government pension program, and that's the one that they give to employees, to teachers, to cops. Those are known as unfunded liabilities. We've seen this happening for a long time. I saw that explained once by a think tank that was trying to convince the Illinois Teachers Union to adopt a private pension plan. And what they had was a large trash can, and they were dumping dollar bills into it. And they said, this is what your pension plan looks like right now that's under the government. And then the same guy that had the trash can starts walking out and reaching his hand in and throwing fistfuls of money out into the audience. And he goes, but of course, this money, you can't see how much is in there. You can't see if it's actually earmarked for you because it's not. And of course, it's being given away by the government as he throws this money by the fistful into the audience. He said, what we're proposing is that you have a private pension plan. It'll look something like this. And he holds a transparent glass and he sticks a dollar bill in it. It goes, this is yours. This is attached to you, and you can see exactly how much is in it. Well, the problem is that we've had that in terms of private pensions. We see that many people who've worked for corporations for 20, 30 years, they had an agreement. They knew exactly what was in their pension plan. That was always sacrosanct. You could not touch that under bankruptcy, under any other circumstances. It was set. Now, the Boehner budget has attacked that. They're going to allow those corporations, people who have made private commitments to workers for their retirement, they're going to allow them to come in and restructure that. And that means that they're not that far away from bail-ins either, the other form of a private pension where you take your money and you put it into some kind of an investment or an IRA. They're going to come after that as well. So there's the four. You think any of those are secure? Not a single one of those are secure. And it really underscores, I think, the drastic decline in standard of living here in America when you look at how these companies are trying to make the case that they need to have relief from these pension commitments, from these liabilities on their balance sheet. They need to have the ability to restructure those deals. In other words, to cut your benefits. Think about somebody that's worked for 30 years, is about to retire with some large corporation, if that even happens anymore. Most people are fired before that happens. But think about that kind of commitment that they made, let's say, 30 years ago. If you look at the inflation calculator to see what the purchasing power of the dollar is, that means that if you were to buy something in 1984 for $20, today you would pay $45.70 for that. In other words, it's been a 128% increase in the price of things. Or, looking at it another way, the dollar has lost that much purchasing power, about half of its purchasing power, whatever. So they're now going to not be able to pay you back those commitments that they made 30 years ago. They're not going to be able to pay that back with devalued dollars. That's the ropes that the American economy is on. That's how desperate things have gotten. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Paul Craig Roberts. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight on this Monday, December 15th, 2014. Joining us now is Paul Craig Roberts. But before I go to him and talk about what's happening to the world in terms of economics, in terms of lurching towards war, I want to let you know that for the first time we've have X2, Survival Shield X2 on sale. It's the first time we've ever had it on sale. And that sale is 17% off plus free shipping. So normally it's $29.99. You now get it for $24.99 plus with the free shipping. Without free shipping, you would have paid $38 for it. So now you're getting it for $24.99. This is a sale that's only going to run through next Monday. If you order it now, within the next 2 days, you get guaranteed delivery by Christmas. And again, that's Survival Shield X2, available at InfoWarsLife.com, on sale for just the next week. Now, joining us is Paul Craig Roberts, and of course, he was the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury during the Reagan administration. He was famous as the co-founder of Reaganomics, an author of many books, 8, it says right here, 8 different books, a PhD from Georgia Institute of Technology, University of Virginia. And I wanted to ask him, Dr. Roberts, thank you for joining us. I wanted to ask you about what's going on, your take on oil. It looks to me like it has got multiple aspects of it, not only attacking our domestic energy production, but also a knife aimed straight at the jugular of Putin in Russia. Would you say?
David, I don't really know. All I know for a fact, if news reports are correct, and you never know if that's true either, that the OPEC, or the Saudis primarily, normally when you have a recession and the demand for oil drops and the price starts going down, in the past, the Saudis restrict their output. They cut back the production in order to reduce the fall in the price. So they protect the price by restricting output when the demand falls. That's their normal behavior. This time, this is not happening, apparently, if news reports are correct. But of course, I'm not connected to the oil industry and have no independent information about it. So if news reports are correct, for the first time, or for an unusual incident, the Saudis are not restricting output as the demand falls, and so the price is going down. Now, the effect of this, of course, is devastating for the American fracking industry. You might remember that in order to get fracking underway and give fracking companies the ability to override community concerns, homeowner concerns, to override people's concerns with surface water and groundwater, the industry promised 100 years of energy independence. In other words, they created this impression that the United States would no longer have any imported energy, that we would have a century of our own energy. And by making these kinds of claims and establishing this kind of attitude, they were able to override the real objections to fracking. Now, that all of that fracking started with a much higher oil price. The price falls down like it does. This industry doesn't pay. The costs are higher than the price, and so you could look at this as the Saudis were taken in by this propaganda. I've seen various reports from people who claim to be experts that at best there was 20 years from fracking, not 100. Now, maybe the Saudis were taken in. They didn't want to lose their market, so they're just driving these companies into the ground. That's one explanation. Another explanation that people advance is that we've hired the Saudis to put the pressure on Russian revenues by driving down the price of oil, because the Russian economy is dependent in some ways on the sale of oil. And so if the price of oil is driven down, and generally all energy prices tend to move together, so maybe it also hurts their sales of natural gas. And so this is seen as an effort of the United States to hurt Russia's ability to resist the various U.S., NATO, EU pressures. I don't know what the answer is. The only fact we know is that for some reason the Saudis are not restricting output in order to protect the price.
Well, let's look at what is going to come, regardless of what the motivations were on this. Let's look at some of the immediate practical considerations that are going to come under fire here. As I talked about earlier, we've got this report from David Stockman's Contra Corner. Says, here comes Wall Street's latest toxic waste. He says oil-linked notes will blow up under $80, many of them. And so are you concerned about the derivatives market that's attached to oil prices?
Yes, a lot of people are, not just David. I think that is a possible explosive event for the banks, and it could be the reason that I think it's the Citibank chairman that's been pressing to overcome the part of the replacement legislation for Glass-Steagall that if they can get that repeal, it lets them have access to depositors' accounts in the event there are derivative problems.
Yes.
So that could be one of the reasons that the Citibank chairman is pressing to overturn this legislation, because the legislation, I think, requires them to move their derivative stuff into subsidiaries and get it off the entity that holds the consumer deposits.
That's correct. With Dodd-Frank, they were supposed to separate out those speculative investments away from their core banking business, which would be insured by FDIC deposits. And we've seen a lot of heavy lobbying by Diamond as well as by Citibank to get this in. And it looks like they got what they wanted. That's part of the budget deal that got rammed through by Boehner. And, of course, it's alienated even a lot of the Democrat base. They essentially have alienated their voters by giving this massive gift to the bankers, telling them we'll underwrite and insure your risky investments using the U.S. taxpayer.
So Elizabeth Warren wasn't able to block it? I know she was trying to block it.
Yeah, I think it's. I think the deal has gone through. I believe anyway. That's what they're trying to do, and whether that's gone through
or not, it's an indication that they themselves are worried about the oil derivatives. But there are all sorts of other derivatives.
Oh yeah,
any of them could blow up, and so what we see again is that 3 or 4 banks control the economic policy of the United States, and it controls the fate of all the rest of us.
Yeah, that's very true. We were talking about this in the last hour. This Michael Schneider went through and looked at how bad the week was last week in terms of economic metrics. And he pointed out the similarities to 2008. First, we had an oil crash, then we had a commodities crash, then we had junk bonds crashing, and then we had the stock market crashing. So all it takes when you've got this this derivatives market that now, by some people's estimate, is over $2 quadrillion worldwide, when you've got an economy that is only, worldwide GDP is only about, what, 60 trillion or whatever. When you've got that much speculation out there, that larger derivatives market, that it just takes one part of it to explode, and that can essentially kind of create an economic avalanche, can it?
That's right. And remember now, the recession in at the end of 2007, this was caused by the exploding fraudulent financial instruments.
Yes.
This time around, it may be that a recession itself causes the financial instruments to explode, because there's every indication that not only has there never been a recovery, the recovery is an illusion created by understating inflation, overstating GDP growth, overstating jobs, not counting discouraged workers as unemployed. The whole thing is an illusion, and it's shot to pieces by the facts. For example, the Federal Reserve, it's just done a survey, and they found that that half of 25-year-olds are back at home living with parents. They're either unemployed or the jobs they have are not sufficient to pay rent.
Yeah, and I think that the fantasy that we have recovered economically from 2008, I think that's really underscored by what happened with the pension plans and the fact that Democrats and Republicans told us in this budget bill that they're going to give corporations the ability to renegotiate their pension commitments. That's something that has always in the past been sacrosanct. And when you look at the fact that private companies who've made these pension commitments decades ago would now be paying them back with much cheaper dollars, the purchasing power has been eroded by the Federal Reserve. They're not even able to make that. What does that tell us?
Right. Of course, the theft of pensions goes back a long time. I think it started when Eastern Airlines was taken over.
Mm-hmm.
That's his name. And of course, they're already cutting back and reducing all the municipal workers' pensions.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, your host, and we have on the phone with us Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, one of the co-founders of Reaganomics, an economist and author. And we're talking to him about what the outlook is. And I guess maybe, Dr. Roberts, we're coming to the end of the year. I'd like to kind of get your general forecast as to what lays ahead on your most recent essay on your site. PaulCraigRoberts.org is an article on the brink of war and economic collapse. And you say, on occasion, a reader will ask if I can give readers some good news. The answer is not unless I lie to you, like your government and the mainstream media do. So what's the bad news for next year?
Well, David, let's cut to the chase. Everything is based on lies. The economy is based on lies. And we now see both houses of Congress have passed resolutions that set the basis for Washington fighting the Russians to the death of the last Ukrainian soldier. We're clearly going to arm the Ukrainians and hope that they are involved in a war with Russia, because this would greatly embarrass Russia, who obviously would win the war and would be designated the aggressor, and this would be used to further isolate Russia from Europe. So this is pretty much predictable given the two resolutions from the House and the Senate. I think the Senate vote was unanimous, and the House vote was 411 to 10. So we see out of the entirety of the Congress, which I think is some 535 people, the Americans, people, succeeded in electing 10 intelligent people.
That many? So, I mean, that's pretty optimistic.
So much for democracy. Yeah. Now, for the economy, as we were saying, when you have half of 25-year-olds, these are, for the most part, I think, college educated, having to live at home because they can't get employment, and you've got 30% of 30-year-olds living at home in their former childhood rooms with their parents, then clearly there's no economy. There's just no economy.
That's right. That's right. Nobody's able to create any wealth in their personal life.
And when you've spent 2 decades moving the American economy offshore so that shareholders could enjoy the capital gains from the higher profits from the lower labor cost, and the executives of the corporations can enjoy multi-million-dollar bonuses from the higher profits from the lower labor costs. So moving the jobs offshore, there's no economy here.
Yeah.
So we have a massive trade deficit that can't possibly be closed. And so the whole house of cards is standing on the dollar.
On the petrodollar. And I think that's a key thing, too, that we see as they're moving to, as we see the price of oil plummeting, as many people believe. It's Saudi Arabia that is, as you point out earlier, they declined to cut production as prices dropped. So they're basically feeding into this decline. And the petrodollar is really one of the few things that we've got here, this fantasy that we've pushed on to the entire world, the petrodollar. And, of course, Putin is pushing with China and with India to try to go around the petrodollar. Once they do that, that's going to have tremendous impact for our standard of living, isn't it?
Yes, it's not just the petrodollar. It's the use of the dollar as world reserve currency. It has many other uses.
Right, right.
You can
But that's
settle.
kind of the core of its reserve currency aspect. And of course, as we talked about earlier, this is setting off a massive collapse of the derivatives market, which could cascade into the commodities, the stock markets, and that sort of, just as the Congress signs us up yet again to ensure the big bankers' speculations in the derivatives market.
Well, if they grab everybody's bank deposits and everybody's pensions and so forth, and the population here will starve. They won't have any money.
Yeah.
And so if they do that, they will provoke amazing social unrest. And as half the country is armed, the whole thing will blow up in their face. So I don't really know how stupid and foolish they will be.
There was kind of an interesting little side story that came up last week where they were sending out $200,000 worth of emergency kits to managers at the 7 or 8 largest banks. They were kind of little $50 prepper kits. I don't know that would have any practical value whatsoever, that small of amount of prepping, but I think it kind of showed their concern, don't you?
I didn't know what to make of that, whether that was a joke or what, because
exactly.
in space, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Roberts. That's paulcraigroberts.org. Thank you so much for joining us.
In the past decade, we have witnessed unparalleled scientific discoveries in the area of health. But no one has put together a formula that focuses directly on brain health, nerve growth factors, and optimizing your cellular energy at the same time. DNA Force is one of the most expensive formulas to produce. Some of the ingredients in DNA Force are $12,000 a kilogram. We are using the coveted, patented, only American source of PQQ, CoQ10, and more. You want the best that's out there at the lowest price anywhere? Well, we're bringing you a total win-win. The ultimate value, cutting-edge, trailblazing game changer that also supports the InfoWar. We have produced a limited run of DNA Force, and it will take up to 12 weeks to produce more once we sell out. Secure your DNA Force today at InfoWarsLife.com or call toll-free 888-253-3139. DNA Force from InfoWars Life.